to join us today. My first question is pretty easy one. Several of witnesses have used the term ICTS regime. People watching us on television probably have no idea what you're talking about. I'm not very good at acronyms. How would you explain, Mr. Fife, how would you explain that to your grandmother?
The unpronounceable acronym happens to stand for Information and Communications Technology and Services, which isn't how I'd begin the explanation for my grandmother, though.
Oh, good. How?
Is
your grandmother still alive? Is she still alive? She might be watching you.
No, unfortunately not, but we have a daughter who's named for her. So
oh, well, good.
That's an alternative.
Next best thing.
This is meant to be a structure inside the U.S. government that pulls together expertise from all the relevant parts of the executive branch, national security departments and agencies, commercial and economic departments and agencies, and the intelligence community in order to assess the national security implications and risks of all of the enormous flows of data that go cross-border, especially between the United States and so-called foreign adversary countries, beginning with China and Russia.
All right, I think your grandmother would probably say, that's my grandson. I'm so proud of him. So, all right, thanks for doing that. Got a question really for all of our witnesses. And I think we'll lead off, Ms. Bliss, with asking you to respond to it initially. But as the leaders of this subcommittee, Senator Cornyn and I have long advocated for re-engagement with our allies in the Asian Pacific region. He's mentioned this, John has mentioned this, but after the previous administration abandoned multilateral trade cooperation, now as the Biden administration works to reclaim a seat at the table with our Indo-Pacific economic framework, digital trade presents a clear opportunity for U.S. leadership in this critical region. We know that both our allies and our adversaries in the region are racing to write the rules of the road on digital trade. And our allies have been clear that they welcome our partnership on the digital trade in order to advance our shared values. Here's my question for each of you. What specific digital trade policies should the United States advocate for in the Indo-Pacific economic framework? I'll just say that again. What specific digital trade policies should the United States advocate for in the Indo-Pacific economic framework in order to advance our economic security and geopolitical interests? Ms. Bliss, would you be our leadoff hitter there, and then Mr. Fife, and then we'll go down the line.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we did supply to the committee as an annex our specific recommendations with regard to IPEF and more generally in terms of what we believe should be included in the digital chapter. But let me highlight some areas, and that is we think that the provisions that were included in the bipartisan USMCA digital chapter, and then building on that, U.S.-Japan, also looking to some of the innovations that have been made by our trade partners in the region, Australia, Singapore, and others, provide important new elements that can be included. At its core, and I think you've listed this in your resolution, we need to certainly address cross-border data flows, and I would point out that it is not the case that there is an absolute allowance of cross-border data flows in all circumstances. There is provision for deterrence from that where there are legitimate public policy objectives, and that is certainly something that we would want to see continued. Two, data localization is pernicious and increasing, and has wide implications, particularly in respect to challenges posed by China, and I think it also relates to the data issues that have been raised here today. And I also believe that the source code provisions, which again are not absolute, it's not an absolute prohibition on mandatory transfer of source code. There are exceptions to that for law enforcement, for not just judicial processes, but also regulators, inspections, and other circumstances. So just want to correct the record that 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 source code provision is not absolute. Also want to emphasize the importance of a permanent moratorium on e-commerce, and also new provisions that we've suggested, including things like AI best practices principles, which we think can address some of the issues that have been raised, particularly in Mr. Woodall's testimony with regard to concerns about potential abuses of AI in the workplace. We also think it's very important there be a commitment to worker upskilling in the digital area. We also think that inclusion of tools for small business is incredibly important. And certainly greater inclusivity is very important. And I also should mention addressing the pernicious problem of censorship. I think it's another area that should be addressed.
Good, thank you for that comprehensive response. My time has expired, and we'll come back later in the hearing, and I'll have an opportunity to invite our other three witnesses to respond to the same question. And that having been said, staff's given me a list that says the next person to recognize for questioning is Senator Grassley, and then Senator Cortez Masto. So Senator Grassley, you're up, followed by Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you.